There is a moment in every great friendship where words stop being enough, where you stop explaining what someone means to you and you just live it quietly, day after day, year after year. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. had one of those friendships. And for most of their lives, neither of them talked about it in the way the world wanted them to. They didn't need to. But near the end, when the rooms got quieter and the years heavier, Sinatra finally said out loud what everyone who had been paying attention already knew. The story of these two men is not just a story about music or fame or Las Vegas. It is a story about loyalty tested under some of the ugliest pressures America had to offer in the 20th century. It is a story about a white Italian-American singer choosing, again and again, to stand next to a black Jewish entertainer in rooms that made that choice costly. And it is a story about what happens when two people who genuinely love each other still manage to hurt each other deeply. To understand what Sinatra confirmed, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not to the Sands Hotel, not to Ocean's 11, back to 1941, backstage in Detroit, where a 26-year-old Frank Sinatra was performing with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra and a 15-year-old Sammy Davis Jr. was part of the opening act. Sammy was already extraordinary. He could sing, dance, do impressions, command attention with nothing but his presence. But he was 15, and the world was making sure he knew his place. Sinatra noticed him. Not in the way audiences noticed entertainers. In the way one performer recognizes something rare in another. They spoke. They spent time together between rehearsals. Something connected. It wasn't a formal friendship yet. They were both too young, too busy, too caught up in the machinery of touring for that. But something was planted into those backstage conversations that would grow quietly for the next 5 decades. They lost touch as schedules pulled them apart. But in 1945, Sammy showed up at the stage door of Frank's CBS radio show in Los Angeles. Not as a fan looking for an autograph, as someone picking up a conversation that had simply been paused. That quiet reappearance meant something. It told Sinatra that whatever had sparked in Detroit was real enough to travel, real enough to make a young man cross a city just to continue ITWY 1947. Sinatra had enough power in the industry to make real decisions about who shared his stage. When he secured a 3-week run at the Capitol Theater in New York, he specifically requested the Will Maston Trio as his opening act. He wanted Sammy there. And once they were working together again, Sinatra did something that would shape Sammy's entire career. He told him to stop hiding behind impressions. Sammy had built his early reputation on mimicking other singers with stunning accuracy. Audiences loved it. But Sinatra saw a deeper voice inside him and pushed him toward it. That kind of encouragement does not come from casual professional courtesy. That comes from someone who sees your potential more clearly than you do yourself. Then came the night in March 1950 that revealed the exact kind of man Frank Sinatra was. Sammy had gone to watch Frank perform at the Copacabana in New York. He was turned away at the door because of the color of his skin. This was not unusual in 1950. It was not even surprising. It was simply the reality Sammy lived with every single day. What happened next, though, was different. Sinatra found out. And without hesitation, without turning it into a political moment or a press opportunity, he personally ensured that Sammy returned the following night and was admitted. No cameras, no speeches, just a man using his name to correct an injustice done to someone he cared about. That moment matters because it was not the last time. When a theater tried to bar Sammy because of his race, Sinatra tore up his own contract rather than perform without him. When the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas had segregation policies that prevented Sammy from staying there, Sinatra refused to take a stage. He had a rule, and he lived by it. If Sammy wasn't welcome, neither was Frank Sinatra. In a city where Sinatra's name was worth enormous amounts of money, that kind of refusal had real consequences. He was willing to pay them. That it is worth pausing here to appreciate what this cost him. Sinatra was not operating in some enlightened future where standing up for a black colleague was easy or popular. He was doing it in mid-century America, in an entertainment industry with deep ties to people and institutions that did not share his values. Every time he used his leverage for Sammy, he was spending something. goodwill, political capital, professional relationships. He spent it anyway. The accident in November 1954 brought out another layer of who Sinatra was in Sammy's life. Sammy was driving from Las Vegas to Los Angeles when a car pulled out in front of him. The collision was devastating. His nose was broken. His left eye was so badly damaged it had to be replaced with a prosthetic. He was 28 years old and facing the very real possibility that his performing career was finished. Sinatra stepped in immediately. He covered the medical bills. He gave Sammy a place to stay while he recovered. He made sure that when Sammy eventually stood back on a stage, he had the foundation to do so. 2 months after the accident, Sammy was performing again. And as he always said, he was never really standing there alone. That'd be why the time the Rat Pack took shape in the early 1960s. Their friendship had already been tested and proven over nearly 2 decades. Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. They were individually famous. Together, they were something else entirely. They filmed Ocean's 11 during the day and performed at the Sands at night. The shows they called The Summit were not polished productions. They were conversations between friends who happened to be extraordinary entertainers. The audience wasn't watching a performance. They were eavesdropping on a friendship. Those nights at the Sands became legend fast. Hotels along the Strip filled up. Flights into Las Vegas sold out. People flew in from across the country because they could sense something genuine happening on that stage. Even John F. Kennedy stopped by during a campaign visit, moving easily between the world of politics and the world that Sinatra had built. There was no separation between those two worlds in that room. Power recognized power. But beneath the glamour and the cigarette smoke and the laughter, there were complications. Some of the jokes on that stage leaned hard into race. Sammy was often the target. At the time, some people read it as the group's way of mocking bigotry by putting it in the mouths of friends. Others were less certain. Sammy himself carried that tension quietly. He knew people saw him as Sinatra's mascot, Sinatra's acolyte, the man allowed into the room because Frank vouched for him. It bothered him even as he understood why it happened. The dynamic between them was never quite equal, and both of them knew it. What they were still figuring out was whether equality was even the right word for what they had to be. Why the late 1970s, the friendship hit its most serious wall. Not because of ego or professional rivalry or any of the things that usually break up famous friendships. It broke over something far more personal. Sammy had found cocaine. After his marriage to Mae Britt ended in 1968, something in him had come loose. The civil rights era was charging every performance with a kind of political electricity that exhausted him. He was always being measured, always being tested, always being asked to be symbolic as well as talented. He was lonely in ways that crowded rooms could not fix. He made choices that reflected all of that. Sinatra did not look away. He confronted Sammy directly and gave him an ultimatum: clean up or lose the friendship. That sounds harsh written out plainly, but it was also, in its own way, an act of love. Sinatra was not willing to watch someone he considered a brother destroy himself and say nothing. The gentler thing might have been to stay quiet. The more loving thing was to say it out loud, even knowing it might end things between them. Sammy did not change immediately, and Sinatra did what he said he would do. He closed the door. For 3 or 4 years, they barely spoke. Polite nods at events. Cold civility. The warmth they had built over 30 years gone. For Sammy, that absence was a particular kind of devastation. He had spent his entire adult life fighting to be seen as his own man, not just Frank's discovery, not just Frank's friend. But Frank's absence proved how deeply that friendship had shaped him. He had grown up in that shadow, learned from it, pushed against it, and ultimately loved the man casting it. Losing him wasn't freedom. It was loss. Then came the reconciliation. It did not happen in a press release or a public announcement. It happened the way real reconciliations happen, quietly, through people who cared about both of them. Alto Vice Davis and Barbara Sinatra worked carefully and patiently to ease the tension over time. Conversations thawed. Something shifted. And then one night in Las Vegas, the two of them finally made peace. Sammy was so full of it that he called his friend Tom Dreesen ahead of a shared engagement and asked him to fly in a day early. His voice, by every account, was electric. He and Frank had made up. It was real. What Sammy did not tell Dreesen was what he had planned for that night. Frank was on stage, moving through his set with the unhurried mastery he had spent decades perfecting. Hell launched into The Lady is a Tramp. And then, without warning, Sammy ran across one of the long tables near the stage, leapt up into the spotlight, grabbed a microphone, and joined him in song. The audience saw it before Frank did. The room erupted, and when Sinatra turned and saw him standing there, something crossed his face that all the tailored tuxedos and carefully managed public image in the world could not manufacture. Joy, pure, unguarded joy. They stood there together, voices weaving through a song they both knew by heart, and for a few minutes the years of silence dissolved completely. To the people watching, it felt like more than entertainment. It felt like something being restored that had no business being broken in the first place. Sammy, afterwards, was almost giddy, like someone who had been holding his breath for 4 years and finally let it go. May 1990. Sammy was dying. Throat cancer, the particular cruelty of it not lost on anyone who understood what his voice had meant. He was 64 years old. He had spent weeks in and out of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, and the man who had once seemed made of pure kinetic energy was slowing down in ways that felt impossible to reconcile with who he had been. He died on May 16, 1990, that when Sinatra spoke after Sammy's death, the words he chose were not the words of a public figure offering a statement. They were the words of someone trying and failing to compress more than 40 years into sentences. He said it was difficult to put that much friendship into a few words. He said Sammy never gave less than everything on stage, and gave even more Tatos lucky enough to call him a friend. He said that a generous God had given them Sammy for as long as he did, and that thinking of heaven now holding his magic brought him something like warmth. He was not performing grief. He was living it. Sinatra canceled tour dates and flew to California. At the funeral, he sat in the front row, known as the icon, not as the chairman of the board, but as a man saying goodbye to his brother. He served as honorary pallbearer. In Las Vegas, the lights on the Strip went dark for 10 minutes. On Hollywood Boulevard, tap dancers gathered at Sammy Star. The city paused for a man who had once been turned away from its finest rooms. Sinatra himself died on May 14, 1998. He was 82. His final words, according to Tato's present, were that he was losing. He was buried in Desert Memorial Park in Cathedral City, next to his parents, in a blue business suit. The words on his grave marker read, "The best is yet to come." What Sinatra confirmed, in the end, was not a secret. It was something people had watched play out across 5 decades in dressing rooms and on stages and in hospital waiting rooms and in the quiet space between two men who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. He confirmed that Sammy Davis Jr. was not a professional ally or a famous acquaintance or even just a close friend. He was family, the kind you choose rather than inherit, which in some ways makes the choice more meaningful than blood. He confirmed that the friendship was real when it was inconvenient, real when it cost him something, real when Sammy was spiraling, and real when Frank himself was the one who pulled away. It survived a fractured America, a fractured industry, addiction, silence, and 4 decades of 2 very large personalities trying to coexist without one swallowing the other. And, in the end, even death could not entirely separate them. Frank Sinatra died 2 days before the anniversary of Sammy's passing. Some people call that coincidence. Some people call it something else. What are your thoughts on Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr.'s friendship? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you the way it moved us, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. There's so much more where this came from.